we've done this joke. We did at the beginning of the Portal 2 podcast. Remember, you said,
"Oh yeah,
really got a podcast reserves."
I think we need to brush up these old podcasts.
Now we should listen to them. Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Split Screen Podcast. My name is Craig Wilson. I am joined once again by the wonderful Alan Williamson.
You are joined once again by the Alan Williamson.
The Alan Williamson.
Good afternoon, Craig.
Good afternoon, the Alan. Today we're going to be talking about what have games taught us.
Certainly in terms of podcast introductions, clearly nothing is the answer, given the number of games I've played. This one has kind of been, I guess, gestating for a while. A couple of months ago, I wrote a feature about what did a game teach me about love, and the answer was not a lot, really. Yeah. So I guess, we just wanted to expand that and talk about what has a game taught us about anything. I think that was one of the lines I used in my hyperbolic piece. As I like to do, throwing out grand questions that never get answered. Who cares? Yeah. What's a game taught you? Don't rush in, Craig. Just start talking.
Well, it's that terrible thing. It's because a lot of games, majority of games, it's entertainment, and they entertain me perfectly well. A lot of people, when you ask them, well, why do you play games? They'll say escaping from reality.
Really? Do people really say that? Because most people just go, I don't know, it's something to do.
I've got that. No, you've said that in a letter to me. Those exact words. Escape from reality.
Yeah, but that was me. This is somebody that actually thinks about it and writes about it. I guess
when I said normal people. Okay, when you ask normal people why they play games, they'll say for entertainment.
So when you ask incredibly introspective game critics, they say escape from reality.
Yeah, or that it's pushing the art form, and that it's the new greatest thing ever.
I say escape, but I think what I really mean is blocking it out, because there is no escape from this.
Yeah, it's the same escape that I want when I'm reading a book. I just want to be entertained by something and have something provoke a thought that I wouldn't have had I not been reading.
I know a lot of people get annoyed with the word immersion, but it's about being engrossed in it.
Yeah,
you're not escaping anything. Obviously, in the same way you go on holiday, you're not escaping whatever it is you come back to, but you're engrossed in something else. And it takes your mind off things, and that's what's nice. One of the first things I'd sort of thought of with this was that although games are obviously made by human beings, I don't think we've reached the singularity yet. Although they're made by humans, they don't really have a lot of humanity. So whenever you get something like, I don't know, an auteur, film director, or somebody writing a novel, a lot of that they are putting their personality into it, and that's because it's one person making that.
Yeah.
Whereas games are made by teams of often tens to hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And even when you have one or two people doing it, they don't really put a lot of their own humanity across.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen there's like different structures that they can organise their teams of developers and things like that. And you might have, like in Double Fine, you've got Tim Schafer at the top, so you've got that one creative lead, and you can tell that they're all coming up with ideas, but they all ultimately will filter up to him, and then the ones that he wants are the ones that go in, and he gives it that direction. So he's like the director. But if you're trying to tell something quite personal or quite intimate, I imagine it'd be a lot harder to do that, because you'd have to try to get everyone on the levels below you to sort of have the right ethos or have like the right emotion. Or, I don't know. It'd be...
Well, I mean, a lot of the I guess I'm trying to think of people who are like really individual, distinct directors, and the kind of ones that spring to mind are like David Cage, who did Heavy Rain and Fahrenheit, and Hideo Kojima. Those are the only people that really, well, you would assume have that kind of artistic vision. But I don't think even Kojima, like certainly in Metal Gear Solid 4, I don't think he did everything. I think he more kind of floated around in a cloud around the project. I don't know if he was like...
Yeah, and I guess
everything.
You can still have a really strong creative voice, and you don't necessarily need to be the dictator. George A. Romero, I was speaking about him earlier, on film, on set, he doesn't direct the zombies. One, because he says you can't direct zombies. You just tell them to do something and they'll do something different anyway. But he enjoys that. But he is actually quite open. Although he writes the script and he knows what he's going to go and shoot, he's very open to the actors trying to take it in a slightly different direction.
Like ad-libbing things and
so
running with it,
Yeah, so I know on Metal Gear Solid 2, Hideo Kojima gave out these idea books and just blank pads of paper. He would give them out to his staff, and they would sketch little ideas or write ideas that they would think for him for the story or the plot. And one number of stuff came out of that: the idea of leaning against a wall and looking around the corner, the idea of spraying bombs with something to freeze them, and those are like really major elements of the game.
Yeah, the leaning around the corner is pretty integral.
And you could say, okay, well, the gameplay stuff, maybe it was a gameplay guy who came up with it, but then that concept of having the freezing bombs, well, that might have led then to the character of Stillman, who then becomes he's a terrible character. He's the one who he has a fake leg and a fake limp. So those ideas might flow up back into the creative sphere again.
But maybe we do need more individual like authors of stories and authors of games, like I don't know, Jonathan Blow. Well, see, Super Meat Boy was done by a team of two, but Super Meat Boy wasn't exactly high concept art.
Well, I would say, even though it wasn't something you would say of story-wise, World of Goo had a very distinct voice to it.
Yeah. I don't even know how many people were in 2D Boy. Two. D. Boy.
Yeah.
Cool.
There we go.
Right, there we go.
And so I think you're more likely going to get something that will maybe question your preconceptions out of a smaller team than you would a larger team. Something that will challenge you, either intellectually in terms of its themes or content, like a book or a film could.
Yeah. Well, this is it. Books are written by generally one or two people.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things that games never deal with, well, at least they try to deal with it, but they deal with it in such a superficial and perfunctory way that it just ends up irritating me, is how they deal with morality and ethics. And of course, this is the classic save the baby, eat the baby. And I think I talked about Mass Effect 3, which, at least acknowledges the nutritional value of the baby, as I have put it. But I mean, you'd said to me about, your kind of how you felt playing an RPG.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of RPGs, a lot of BioWare RPGs, where you've got this choice of how you want to go about it. You either go in guns a-blazing, or you sneak in. So ultimately, you're either a sociopath or just a kleptomaniac. Like, you're like, I will save this town, but then while you're there, you plunder everything of value within the house, and they're just standing there watching you. Or maybe they've got their back turned, and then when they turn around, they don't notice that their kitchen is now devoid of everything that was there.
Well, that's what I used to do in Fable, was he'd wait until the shopkeeper's back was turned, and then steal a sword, and then sell it to him, and then he'd put it back on the shelf, and then you'd steal it again. Nice
one. But yeah, it's well, you can have interesting moral dilemma choices. I think some of them, they're softening it a bit. It's not as black and white as it used to be, but oftentimes you're still coming into some scenario where you go into a town, classic example, and there's a conflict. Team A wants to kill Team B for some reason, and you might settle that by either killing Team A or killing Team B, or resolving the issue for everyone involved. But this is more, I'm thinking about the Fallout games, and maybe that's the wrong choice, but you tend not to come into a situation where it's not life or death. You don't come into a sort of interesting moral situation where it's like, well, do you help the person just because you think it's good to help someone, rather than it being offset always by some sort of gain if you do something evil?
Well, I mean, generally you kind of just accumulate good points or bad points. At the moment I'm playing Baldur's Gate, which is not like that at all. And although it has aged, and I'm sure I'll discuss this at some point, so let's not waste all my creative juices in one one podcast. But I don't know if it's a Dungeons and Dragons thing or if it's a Baldur's Gate thing, but it's basically got 9 types of morality. So you've kind of got good, neutral, and evil.
It's just then chaotic.
Yeah, you've got like chaotic, and then like pure, and then something else. I probably should have done some research before this, but either way, there are definitely 9 stances. What those are is ambiguous and open to interpretation.
Super.
Yeah, super good,
super evil.
There's no. I think it's lawful, and it's lawful and chaotic. So you can be like a kind of chaotic goody, where it's like you don't really care what you do, but you'll do whatever you feel's right. And there's lawful good, where you're going to play by the book. But the thing about Baldur's Gate is that you'll meet these characters, and there's one sort of side quest where these fishermen are complaining that a witch has cursed them. So you walk your way up the coast towards where the witch lives, and she's like, "Well, no, I'm not actually a witch, and they stole some magic stone from this god that I worship." So you go back, and you're like, "You guys are talking out of your arse, aren't they?" And they go, "Yeah, but kill her anyway, we'll give you loads of money." And so with a lot of those scenarios, there isn't actually any right or wrong, and you don't know. So I think it's funny that game's so old now. I mean, it must be about 99, 2000, but yet it actually has genuine moral ambiguity. But I think that's because there's so many different ways in which you can affect it. I mean, Fable 2 had good and bad, and then it had the new concept of fat versus thin, which didn't really change much. But with this one, you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and so sometimes you can be like, leave this guy alone, or you can be like, I just don't care.
Yeah.
And you'll get into situations where you come to this inn, and this person outside the inn like, are you? I called my guy Longstride because I thought that it sounded like that Robin Hood film, and I got this kind of cheesy Robin Hood vibe about it. So he says, "Oh, are you Longstride?" And you can say, "Yep, that's me," or "No," or "Never heard of that guy." And I tried like every single conversation possibility and no matter what I said, he always got into a fight with this person. Because you'd say, I'm Longstride, and he would go, great, I'm here to kill you. Or you could say, I'm not Longstride, and he'd go, I don't believe you, and I'm also here to kill you. Or you could say, who's Longstride? And you go, then he said, nice try, Longstride, I'm actually going to kill you. But it was interesting to see if there's a way out of that.
Yeah.
And it was quite good that in a lot of these games, there is no way out, or at least that one kind of compounded it and made you feel like, yeah, there really is no way out of this, I'm going to have to kill him, rather than giving you the illusion that your decisions matter. This is just like, nah, we're actually going to have to bludgeon this guy.
So was that one where you went through all three options? Mm-hmm. So you didn't choose one option and then kind of reload back a little bit and then say, well, I wonder what door 2 would have been like.
Well, the problem is that Baldur's Gate is such a difficult game that every time I got into a fight with this person, I died. And so I was trying to see if there's a scenario in which I would not die.
Oh, okay.
That's the game where you really have to quick save constantly.
I mean, I'm thinking back to when I was playing through Blade Runner. I mean, that really had interesting moral decisions, I guess, because you're trying to track down replicants. Should I say, is this person human or not? And then, do you kill them or do you not?
So you do get that choice in the game.
Yeah. But when you make those choices, it's not flagged up to you that you're making a grand decision right now. It's just the reticule over your mouse goes red, and you go, "Oh, I can. If I've got my gun out, I can shoot this guy." But it's not. It's not saying like you've reached an adequate number of points in our counting system that now deems it possible for you to choose whether to shoot this person or not.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes
so it doesn't tell you've reached the end of the conversation tree or anything like that?
Like this character has given you enough plot exposition, so you may now dispose of them because we don't need him anymore to tell our story. No, you can just gun him down and then that chain is gone.
So it doesn't
chain is gone. That angle where you might learn more, because at this point you're questioning whether or not you're actually a replicant.
Can you get stuck in Blade Runner?
I imagine so. You're not picking up. You're picking up clues. You're not combining them as things, so you're never really in a locked room puzzle environment.
Oh, okay.
But you could come out of it. I guess the way you would get stuck is that you wouldn't have a clear idea of what's going on, because they question your reality in it. But so the moral decisions there are: do you sympathise with the replicants, or do you just stick with your gun and gun them down? But because they're sort of taking the source text of Delendroy's Dream of Electric Sheep, I guess you can actually get in a little more interesting creative juice there, more than if you're just making a game from scratch. I don't know if they would be able to pitch it at that level.
Blade Runner, the game of the film of the book.
Well, no, yeah, it's much more riffing on the film. But if you look at any of the later episodes of my Let's Play, you'll see some of those decisions happening, and they're just not flagged up.
Is this a way of you subtly saying,
advertise?
I can't believe you didn't watch my video.
Only 10 people watched it.
Only 10 people?
It's about by the end, there were only about 10.
Well, it's going to be 11 by the end of this bank holiday weekend. I'll tell you that. Or at least on the first part of the video.
Yeah.
I've only got so much patience. But it's funny how you're talking about getting the player to kind of empathise with the replicants, because a lot of games don't do that. A lot of games just give you these faceless antagonists to blow away. Like, one of the things that surprised me about the Gears of War trilogy is I thought they were going to give you some motivation for why the Locusts were doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They were just ugly monsters to blow away, or, I don't know, the Strogg from Quake are another murderous race that you have to blow away. The Covenant from Halo, they're kind of like religious nutters, so I guess there's some kind of motivation there, but you end up siding with some of them. But with a lot of these games, like, I guess the kind of comparison I would want to draw is between kind of dystopian fiction, like, Brave New World, Orwell's 1984, where there's all this kind of system of different classes. Obviously, in 1984, about 85% of the population are these proles, and then you've got the untouchable castes, and obviously that's filtered into a lot of games, like Half-Life 2 to some extent, where you never really see the upper classes of the Combine. Knights of the Old Republic, whenever you go to whatever the first big city's called, it might be called, like, I don't know, Talos or something like that.
Right.
But for those who have played it and have as bad a memory of it as me, the first place you go to, because that's what happens in a BioWare game, you have an introduction, then you go to a big hub world, then you go to several smaller hub worlds, and then you complete the game. Like the Citadel from Mass Effect would be the big hub world.
Right.
So in games like Mass Effect, Knights of the Old Republic, they don't actually touch on issues like class warfare. It's clear there's a kind of underclass here, and in most of those games you come from a very privileged...
Yeah.
In most of those games you come from a very privileged background, but that doesn't actually factor into the storytelling of the decisions you make. It's just you shooting things. Some of them have a purple costume and some of them have a brown costume.
Yeah, and it just keeps coming back to a lot of problems where once you put a gun in someone's hand, I think you can't tell as interesting a story. And if you look at for the amount of hours that you'll spend in one of those games, 40 hours, 100 hours, you should be able to layer that stuff in a way which isn't just a text box that you open up and you choose to read in. That's one of the things on Half-Life 2. Although it's got it's a fantastic world, great, so well written and acted and set out. That first time you go into City 17, I mean, if I ever go back and reread 1984, it'll probably be with the Half-Life 2 visuals in mind than what I had before. But it's kind of there as background dressing, and it's still ultimately a game about running around corridors and shooting guys.
It's still like,
because you've been given a gun and told to run around corners and shoot guys.
It's still like a B movie. It's still like an exploitation film.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just when you point to it as a pinnacle of storytelling, it'd be nice if it was a little bit higher, in terms of literary clout or whatever.
Well, there's games with better stories than that, but it's certainly got a very good atmosphere.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the more we get into these kind of art game discussions and games teaching us things, advancing, you inevitably come back to BioShock because it was, the one of the most. At least they tried. Is the way I would phrase it. It's probably one of the most meaningful games in terms of like story development and trying something different. And it is one of these ones I always hold up as hey, games aren't totally bad. But then whenever you show people a clip from the game, it's a guy in a big drill suit and you're shooting him with rivets.
Yeah, or it's still locked into that old tradition where you've just got these gnarly looking guys full of scars and pus and all that like ghouly bad guy stuff. You think, well, could they dress it up a little cleaner? Maybe BioShock Infinite will, but not from some of the shots I've seen.
Honestly, I am just not that bothered about BioShock Infinite, and I don't know why, because I'm sure it's going to be really good. But
I'm tired.
Maybe it's just part of my growing malaise. But for a start, I don't even know why it's called BioShock Infinite, in the same way that BioShock wasn't called System Shock underwater.
This comes up all the time, though. It's the same way why Dark Knight Rises is called Dark Knight Rises and not Batman 3, because the Dark Knight was such a popular brand name. So you keep it going. It's all about marketing at that level.
Batman Begins 3. Well, is he still beginning or is he ending?
But yeah, if there's a gun poking out the bottom right corner, it's going to have to be doing something a bit different for me to really care now. I just don't have the interest, mate.
Okay, I guess the thing is that one of the things one of the things that I pick up from a lot of films that I watch and books that I read is this kind of feeling of self-improvement and introspection. So the best fiction that I read, and even like the best pieces of other people have written about games and things, that kind of subjective writing, it's all about it's about me taking what I read and applying it to myself and thinking about what that says about me and how do I empathize with this writer or with the characters in this film. And even though games are all about putting you into the position of this character and living through them, if you like, you don't actually, it never reflects back onto you. It's like you're controlling a mannequin rather than actually learning something about yourself. And so with BioShock, I feel like it could have had something good to say there, because the whole message was, the whole message for me was about player agency, and it was about telling people that there's this whole thing about you can save people, you can choose your own path, but the ultimate message of BioShock is you actually can't. There is no agency here, and it's telling you you're the player and you're on rails no matter how far you try to escape.
They're able to have their cake and eat it too. That was a little quite coy thing, and you can only really do that trick once.
Well, that's true.
Although a lot of other games have riffed on it. Again, Stanley Parable very much riffed on it. Portal as well. The original one kind of riffed on it.
But see, Portal 2 doesn't really riff on anything. It's just a good story, but it doesn't have the same impact that the first Portal did. Like in terms of actually having something interesting to say.
No, I don't know if I told you actually. I think because we never mentioned it in the Portal 2 podcast. I think it was on Gamma Sutra. So apologies to whoever came up with this, but their reading was that the old Aperture Science stuff, the Cave Johnson era, that was sort of a commentary about how video game development used to be, where they were just trying things out to try it out. We got some blue stuff that makes you jump high. All right, we're going to coat the walls with it. We're not going to try and then when you get into the modern day Aperture Science, you've got these weird like mutated things because they're trying to like still have some of that old school idea, but then it's still got to look good and it's all kind of contorted and twisted. But I think you're reading it a lot.
I was going to say,
reading onto it. I don't think that's their intent. I just thought it was an interesting idea.
think of these things, we can read as far into them as you want.
And
you
once again, it's games looking at themselves. It's another game that has its meta commentary, or whatever you want to call it. It's about what does it mean to be a video game. And I'm so tired of it, man. It's just everywhere. I want to see a game that talks about something else.
We need to have games that talk about people, and talk about how people interact with each other, and what that means for us. Because it's kind of like this weird echo chamber where if games only talk about themselves, that's only gonna that's not gonna improve anything, is it?
Yeah, and you can get certain games that look at these relationships. I just don't think they're in the places that we're looking at. So if you've got 4 guys around the table and you're playing Dominion, or you're playing Settlers of Catan, or you're playing Carcassonne or something, you've got the game of placing down tiles to build a town, but you then also have this idea of, well, I'm going to work with you only until I get to this point, and then I'm going to actually stab you in the back. I'm going to work with this guy, and so you kind of can get to like some relationship conflict kind of stuff there, which is kind of interesting.
One of the best board games I've played is the Battlestar Galactica board game.
I've been told about this.
Yeah. So the basic premise with the TV show, for those of you who haven't watched it, we can't assume everybody's a total nerd.
I've never seen it, actually.
I've never seen it. No. I've watched the first couple of episodes, but I know quite a lot of it from the board game. So the idea with Battlestar Galactica is there's these aliens called Cylons, and they are like replicants. They basically just look like humans.
Okay.
And there are some of them on this Galactica ship, and they don't know that they're Cylons, but they're like sleeper agents that can be activated at any time. So some of them know and some of them don't. So in the Battlestar Galactica board game, everybody draws this allegiance card when they first start playing, and so you can either be a human, a Cylon, or a Confederate.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind the board game is Galactica's trying to get to this safe world. I think it's called Cobol, and so you have to repel attacks and work as a team, and everybody has individual skills. But you chuck in these cards to it's kind of, instead of rolling a die, you spend these point cards that you accumulate, and so you can throw in bad cards to set back the human progress and diminish the progress. And there's a couple that come from a random pile, so you're never sure if people have contributed or not. So woven through the game, there's this whole theme of mistrust and lies. But then what happens is halfway through the game, everybody draws another allegiance card, and so you could end up definitely being a human. There's only ever one Cylon in a 4-player game, and if you have a 6-player, you get 2 Cylons, and you often get one sympathizer who gets locked in the break.
Nice.
And if you're a sympathizer, you have to immediately draw that.
Yeah.
But you can reveal yourself as a Cylon at any point and sabotage the ship, or you can stay there for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And so even though you're with people who are your friends, there's these amazing psychological mind games, and it kind of shows you how well you don't actually know people, how well people can lie.
Yeah, and reading it, and that's where I guess I don't want to push it too much, but you can get some of that in poker and things like that. Those rudimentary card games where you've got the game that's on the table, but then the game that's in the player's head and between the players.
There's the game and the game.
But with a lot of these sort of narrative video games, just think of Alan Wake, say, which was well written. I think, although again,
well written,
was kind of about a game about video games, especially when you get to the end and you're just shooting placeholder names and then a tree appears. But it's kind of got 3 layers to me. You've got the story, what's happening in the world, what the developer's trying to say, and then how that relates to the character of Alan Wake. And then you've got the fact that Alan Wake needs to relate to how I control him, or I control Alan Wake. So you've got this 3 layers to get through. And so ultimately what's happening in the story in the world isn't necessarily what I'm having to make Alan Wake do, because I'm having to make him point flashlights at people and jump over trees. But suddenly it's about him and his wife, but I'm not really doing anything.
No.
Well, I'm not doing anything to the wife, because that would be rude. But, I'm not doing anything to Alan Wake. Which is why in Heavy Rain, it sounds interesting, where you can sort of have meals with your family, or in The Darkness, I believe there's a part at the beginning of the game, you come home, you find your girlfriend's house, you can sit down and watch To Kill a Mockingbird with her. It's on the television, and it's the full movie. And I think you can sit there on the couch with her and do certain prompts, like sort of put your arm around her, or just little mundane things. But that's a slightly more interesting area to take it, where you might learn something there, or you might explore a different part of a character or yourself there, saying, well, I can't be bothered sitting watching this nonsense.
Well, yeah, it's only interesting in the same sense that watching the TV in GTA is interesting, where you sit down and do it and you go, that's quite interesting. But
I think the payoff of the Darkness is whether or not you choose to stay with your girlfriend and tell her about what's happening or not. So there is still a decision there. It's not just window dressing, which, like, all that stuff in GTA, that's all that is. It's window dressing.
Fluff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just noise to say, like, this world is alive and breathing.
When you think, whenever you think about why do people watch soap operas, why do they watch, like, you know, why do you watch a program like The Royal Family or something like that, which is essentially about the banal existence of a family, but you do it because it's different.
It's so true.
It's because it's different from normal life, because it is more dramatic, and you know, there are things people can learn about themselves from watching those things. Whereas sitting down and watching the TV in GTA is really, really pointless, because you're a fake person watching fake television.
Yeah.
And at that point, I would be like, maybe I should just watch some actual television.
Yeah.
I don't know, not to be too controversial or anything here, but with a lot of games, they have this inherent unrealism where it's all about completion and winning and having mechanical things to do rather than the experience. So, you know, Alan Wake is ultimately, it is a story about this guy looking for his lost wife in a ghost town, but when you boil down to it, it's about shooting monsters and shining lights on them. And it's like, we haven't figured out how to turn stories into games. If you have something like, I don't know, I just saw the Avengers film during the week, which is really good.
Right.
Do go watch it. Okay, so if you have the Avengers, the movie, a lot of those action scenes remind me of games. But whenever you try to translate that into a game, what do you have? You have
Quick time events.
You have cutscene.
Yep.
Here's what we'll have to do. Action. Away and do it.
Yeah.
Victory cutscene. Action sequence. Victory cutscene. Quick time. Action sequence. And so we haven't figured a way to tell the story in the context of the game. That's what makes Half-Life so good, is because you never leave the eyes of the character and it's unfolding through you. Whether the story's good or not, that's a good way to tell it. And obviously, you know, we're, as usual, backpedaling onto a podcast we did before, as our own. Well, we did one about stories.
Oh, we did, yeah, so we did.
You know, let's just do it again. Why not?
You could hear my confused face there as I tried to search through and see what was happening.
You could hear the crumpled wrinkles. But in a lot of these games, you know, if you're watching a film, the hero doesn't necessarily have to succeed.
Yeah.
But whenever you're in a game, hero kind of has to win. Otherwise, you feel like, what was the point of that?
Yeah, I think I think it was Cormac McCarthy in The Road. It's like an example. If that was Cormac McCarthy's The Road, the game, then and you survive the cannibals and you survive the harsh, bleak wilderness, and then you then have a boss fight at the end, or some puzzle which you've been taught how to solve beforehand.
Warning: this podcast contains spoilers for The Road.
But what kind of happens is he just kind of, like, read, you know, this isn't a major thing. This is one paragraph in a book, right? But he kind of just stumbles and he dies. But it accentuates the fact that he's made all these sacrifices for his son. Mm-hmm. But I have a feeling if you were to put that into a game, or say, you know, you end your trilogy of games by having some sort of spirit child come out of a computer and say, well, actually, this is going to go a slightly more spiritual way.
That's never going to happen in a game.
Even though there's nothing after that point, you're not physically playing anything more. Even though that's just how they chose to end their story, people would get upset because they're so used to the rubric that you have to win at the end. You have to be standing atop a pile of enemy corpses with the girl in one hand and the magic sword in the other.
See, I would disagree with that. I think, as I've always said with the Mass Effect thing, the problem was that the ending broke canon.
Yeah.
Not that it was, you know, not that the hero died. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way,
but I wonder
this podcast contains spoilers for Mass Effect 3.
Yeah. But I've seen a lot more, or I've been touched a lot more by smaller games. Bring up the old classic, The Passage was probably the first one.
Good old Passage.
The first one, Jason Roher's Passage. The first one in a while where I sort of played it and I was very quiet after. I was like, that was different. I hadn't really expected that experience to come from it. And
I think you told me to download it whenever we were working at the student newspaper, and you were like, play this for 5 minutes, and I sat and played it, and I was like, Jesus Christ, that was pretty good.
Yeah. And but I think one of the challenges there, and when it was one of the criticisms of it, you said, oh, you can just hold right in it, you walk along a little pixelated world.
Too easy.
And you kind of see the passage of time, we'll say it that way. And that is actually missing the entire point of that game in terms of his message, in terms of the artist's point, as far as I can see it, where if you actually move down, there's a maze, and as you move through the maze, you get little treasure chests, you get points, but if you find a companion, you move as like a little unit of 2 people, and you can't move through certain parts of the maze.
But you gain twice as many points.
Yeah, you gain twice as many points. You get this nice little message of, well, is it more important to be, you're more free when you're alone, But ultimately, the experience, even though it's restricted, is more meaningful when you have someone to come along with you. And that's something I learned from it. And I don't think that's something that I didn't know before I played it. But it was a message that I hadn't really expected to see.
Well, it makes it more salient, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's this thing where we talked about the passage when we're doing our usual, what I like to call pre-casting, which is when we talk about the contents of the podcast before we do it. So by the time we get to actually recording the podcast, there's been this catharsis and we have nothing left to say. But we were talking about, people play this and they miss the point. And is that because games have never had that? I mean, do we need trained on it? Because I've always thought that...
I think you do. I think people do need training. You made a great point in a reality check earlier when you had your girlfriend trying to play, I think it was Infinity Blade or Mirror's Edge.
Mirror's Edge, I think.
Mirror's Edge, and it was about hitboxes and how you knew, like, oh, you can't hit this person in the head. You're going to have to hit them in the chest, essentially. Yeah. But that, to someone who hasn't played those games, it's unfamiliar language. Perhaps we're just too familiar with a certain language and we're just going to be blindsided. We're just going to have the blinkers on and we're not going to see the fact that there's this other area to explore. Literally, in the case of the passage, there was a whole other area of the game to explore that no one did.
But surely the best thing to aim for is something that has such a compelling message that it's inescapable. That in order to actually get through this, you're gonna have to think about it. You're gonna have to look into yourself.
Well, that's it, and then that's a question of framing and direction and storytelling. At that point, you're gonna have to be able to lead them into it in a way which doesn't feel like you're forcing them. So maybe, unless that's part of it.
So maybe one of the things you could say about passages, although it's it's a moving piece of art. Perhaps it's not perfectly designed, in that it could have been. It would have been. There's better ways to illustrate that to people, and they could have been more hinting to suggest to them you can move down. Yeah. I mean, there comes a point at which you don't want to hammer it home too hard. You don't want the big arrow going, move down to experience life, move right to die. You don't want that kind of thing. But sometimes that's unavoidable.
Yeah.
There's one game that's taught us something. Well,
I think, and there's just actually to go back, because I don't think anyone's read this, but it was something I wrote back at the newspaper. The other game that went along that was The Marriage.
Is that Rod Humble?
Rod Humble of The Sims, I believe.
Of The Sims.
Of The Sims.
Born of The Sims.
Head of Sims 3, anyway. And it was a small sort of, you could tell, bedroom game that he'd sort of made.
Well, it's only got two coloured squares with the main characters.
Yeah, little pink square, little blue square. And they're kind of bouncing around this field, and then you've got sort of, I think they're like black circles falling as well. And it's apart from it being called The Marriage, and then the fact you've got a blue and pink, you can surmise then, okay, this is probably male and female. By watching the interaction between this blue square and this pink square, you can pick up, oh, this is how he feels about relationships.
But you can't pick that up. You can only pick that up because the name of the game is The Marriage, and because you're aware this guy's trying to make a statement.
Yeah, but that's no different than if you went into, again, a museum or a gallery and you saw something hanging on the wall, and the title of it is part of it. Yeah. It's part of the way that you frame and present a piece is part of it. And like then the time that you present it in the context of it, that's all feeds into it.
It's kind of like whenever you give a song a title and it contextualizes it.
Yeah.
Or like you were talking about that guitarist did that Thunderstorm song.
Yes.
And because it's called Thunderstorm, you know that the way he's beating down on the guitar is meant to represent raindrops during a thunderstorm.
So I thought you were going to mention how like my latest bunch of songs was called Linnea, which is named after my belt.
Ah, yeah.
Which isn't quite the same.
So Craig released an album of songs and he called them Linnea, and I was like, what does that mean? Has he just spelled linear wrong? And so I said, oh, Craig, why is the album called Linnea? And he goes, oh, it's named after my belt. And I went, what? And he produced, this happened about 10 minutes before we started recording this. He comes out with this belt and sets it down the table and he goes, I've had this belt since I was 14 years old. This belt's been with me to job interviews. So
it's not quite as pride, but yeah.
So it's this album of songs named after a world travelling belt.
Yeah, more or less. So we're saying about kind of the context, and so these games that if they're smaller, they're probably going to be able to pack in a certain message. I mean, maybe and if they're going to be in a bigger game, it's more likely it's going to sit in the background.
Yeah, it kind of has to.
Or you're going to have little moments in a game. Like I think you can pull apart loads of moments from the Metal Gear Solid games. I think if you try to take it as a whole, you're like, this is just such a mess. And it's partly why I kind of like them. But if you go into Metal Gear 4, you've got these little moments where it's like, oh, this is about the accelerated age of technology, the fact that Snake himself is an aged warrior up against all these newfangled kits. And then you see that when you play the PS1 emulated area, when you return to Shadow Moses from the first game, and then you revisit it in the new hardware, and you realize that with a camera that you can move around with all these new gadgets, it's totally different. Like the first one's almost sterile in comparison. And so you can read those moments there, but that's not what the game. Metal Gear 4 isn't about that. Whereas I kind of want a game to be explicitly about something other than just entertainment.
Maybe it's just about putting your critic hat on, getting putting your art hat on, and going, right, I'm gonna art this now. I'm gonna appreciate it as art. And the problem with games is that that's just not always possible. So some of these things just aren't art. Some of them are about crashing a car into a wall. Some of them are about shooting a man in the face.
And those times where people do pick out a moment. And they'll write about it in a very kind of critical way. You always feel like they're having to sort of exclude other areas of the game.
Yeah,
I want to be able to take something as a cohesive whole, and I could do that with Braid. Mm-hmm. I think everything in that game is very intentional.
No, absolutely.
And you can, even to the point of the stars that he put in, which are very horrible things you have to go out of the way to get. But again, the whole game is a game about games. It's about game design.
See, I would contrast that with Limbo, which I haven't reviewed because I don't want to, because whenever I tell people that I didn't like it, it'll damage my professional standing.
I don't think so. I'm very confused what people were talking about when that came out.
But I think that is the opposite of Braid, because I think Braid's a game with a lot of intention that you can read into, and there's very clear signs that things don't match up, and you need to puzzle this out and come to your own conclusion.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Limbo is a game about nothing that people have been reading into beyond what it actually is. Limbo has no ending.
Yeah.
You basically just fall through a panel of glass and you see somebody and the game ends. And that's not me just brushing it over to try and, from a ignorant position. That is actually how it ends. All you can do is make up a bunch of rubbish about that, whereas with Braid you had the little narrative pieces before every chapter, you had all the interesting things that are happening.
The games the puzzles are designed, and so this will be like my next opus. This will be my next massive piece.
Don't pick it up too much now.
Well, but I think like on every puzzle you can actually say it's a commentary on a bit of game design. So there's like one where it's called the pit. It's before a boss fight. The first boss fight in the game, in fact. And you go into the world and there's a little pit of spikes below you and the key is down there. Mm-hmm. And above that there's a door which you unlock the key and then you go on and you face the boss. To get the key, what you need to do, it happens to be a special colour. Yeah, so you jump down, you grab it, you can rewind time and then pick it up. And then you jump over, open the door and then go fight the boss. So what that's saying is that in order to defeat this boss, you're going to have to die first in order to get the key to unlock how to defeat him. And that's basically the case with all boss fights. And then what looks like this huge scary monster in front of you, you then realise, oh, this is the weak spot here, this is his repetition cycle, or this is his attack cycle, here's the moment of a point to attack, oh, I've missed my opportunity, I'll just wait another wee bit, up here's the second opportunity. And that's what it's about. So I think like with Braid, that you can totally take every little moment and find something like that.
Some of them are more obvious than that, though. Like there's a Donkey Kong level that is literally Donkey Kong, and it's a guy shooting Goombas out of a bazooka. Yeah. But what's clever about that is because whenever you move to the left, time rewinds. It both tells people, here's how you need to beat this, and then as soon as you try to do it the way you taught in an earlier game, you fail.
Yeah, if you try run up like Mario would, you get blocked.
Yeah,
and you can't make it.
And so that's where it's really, really clever because it's a game that's aimed at gamers, and only gamers can ever get the most from it.
Yeah.
But that's because it relies on a knowledge of gaming. But I like that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think you need to make something for everyone. I mean, I read through Master and Margarita, and I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic book. And then I just liked the fact that the devil had this cat, and and they're in Russia and they're creating all this havoc. But when I went on the Wikipedia page, it's like, oh, this is actually a satire of 1930s Russian politics. I was like, well, okay, yeah, I didn't get any of that because I am not interested in that area. But I was still able to get enjoyment out of it, but maybe just not the full intent of the author in that case. But then again, that's something where it's years in advance.
I think to bring it back to the topic we loosely decided this podcast was going to be about, one thing that games have taught me is actually about the triviality of entertainment in general, and how sometimes I'll play these games like something like, I don't know, Jet Set Radio or Crackdown or whatever, you're obsessed with collecting all the arbitrary MacGuffins that litter the stages. And, I feel like I shouldn't get caught up in the mastery of them or attaining scores. So whenever you watch those videos of people absolutely beasting Bayonetta and getting pure platinums the whole way through, nailing Ninja Gaiden the hardest difficulty, that's okay for them to do, but what it's taught me about myself is that that's not the kind of guy I am, and I'm happy enough to get to a certain point and then move on, because it's like this whole hype thing about having a best game ever. There's always going to be a new best game ever. So games have taught me a lot about advertising and the power of expectation, and how I used to get so excited about these games coming out, and then I'd be really excited before they came out, and now they just seem like, a few years down the line, I can see that actually didn't really matter that much.
Yeah, there's something very product driven about it, like in a kind of bag of crisps, Pepsi type feel to it.
But I look at that in a very sad way, because I enjoyed getting excited about those things.
But
I really loved looking forward to getting a game at Christmas, and I looked forward to these new titles that were coming out.
But I think until something comes out and it's in your own hands and you are playing it, and everything before that is marketing, so it's going to be skewed like that. That's because that's their purpose, and that's the right thing for them to do, is to get you excited about it and get you longing for it, and then you get your wallet out and buy it. But yeah, and then once it comes into your people's hands, then you can play it. Then it's up to the game to actually make an impression on you, and it's rare that something will make a very lasting impression.
So what have games taught you then?
Nothing.
Okay, right. So maybe we've gone about this all wrong, and we started off saying, what did a game teach you about anything? And that came from my sort of cynical domain of thing, and the underlying presumption of that sentence is, a game has never taught me anything. When did you ever learn anything from a game? How could you possibly? Okay, so let's frame it a different way. What do you want a game to teach you? What do you want to get from it? And that can be something that you get from a book or a film or music as well, or it can be something completely different that only games can do.
Well, if I wanted it to be the thing that's different, it would be the fact that I can make a choice. So in terms of narrative, and the sort of interesting scenarios that you might end up in. Okay, I don't want to say, like, I don't want to pick something too like domestic, but like, I'm not a parent, say, and say there was a game where there's some sort of decision you have to make about the children. Well, I would want that to be a sort of like what if scenario, to sort of explore that in a way.
See, but games can do that. They can take you into worlds you've never been into. Like back to Heavy Rain, there's a bit of the hilarious bit at the start where Jason gets lost in the supermarket, and that can teach me about what it's like to be a parent and what it's like the stress of losing a child.
Yeah, that's what I want. I want kind of more of that, I guess. But the problem that I find is that often where it's then tied back to game mechanics in a way where I might be on a front level thinking about that in terms of the story, but I'm then thinking in terms of, well, the game mechanics side, in terms of the points and scores here.
Yeah, it's like okay, the princess is missing. Why am I collecting all these coins? Or Alan's wake wife has disappeared. Why do we have to collect all these coffee thermoses?
Yeah, or in BioShock, where you've got the choice to save or harvest the little sisters. I'm still doing the math of like, well, is it more beneficial to me to have some Adam right now, or do I want a new plasmid? Because if I get this new plasmid, it might make it easier for the future. And then like the discussion is sort of shifted away from whether or not it's right or wrong to
benefit to the player.
Yeah, like it's taken away from the actual decision we're making about little sisters, whether they want to save them or not. And it's like, well, what's the benefit to me either way? Which is kind of a terrible, it's like a worse moral decision, if anything, because you're now discarding life for your own benefit.
Maybe that is the point. It's about the selfishness of the player, and again, back to their own agency. I think games in general, but probably more with the rise in online games, I think it tells you quite a lot about people. It tells you that, most people are fundamentally quite decent. But I wouldn't go so far to say as people are dicks. But what I think is that what they do teach you are how people are affected by anonymity. Now, that's not a feature of the game per se. That's something that's come from the internet.
Oh, and even before, that's just psychology experiments for years have been about putting someone in one room, make them press a button, and something will happen to another room where someone else is pressing a button, and that's just the basis of it.
But I guess that's just sort of tying back to since you used the word opus, back to my opus about how to rid the internet of scum and villainy. But I think that there's definitely more to be had than that. There's more to be had than just playing an online game. I had a discussion. I say discussion, it was more of an argument with a guy on Twitter yesterday, and somebody had posed this question, should developers do something? Should they do something to stop the prevalence of racism in online games? And this guy just says, no way. Can't do anything. And I said, well, all I said was that's a pathetic and totally useless attitude to take. And he was like, well, you're never going to stop it. What are they meant to do? And I was like, they can moderate it. They can make it socially unacceptable. I can think, I managed to fit 5 ways they could fix things into a tweet. I was quite pleased with that. But I think that's one thing that games would be good for, is consciousness raising, to make us more aware of issues like racism and sexism, and that's coming. That's starting to come to the forefront, but it's only coming to the forefront in the enlightened academic circles where people are analytically sitting down and doing this.
Yeah, because if you look at how people are reacting in terms of just social networking and Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff, we're now. And I don't think it's wrong to say that when you've had like the Arab Spring, a lot more people in the West have been probably more engaged by it, or more. Again, I don't want to choose words to make it sound like it was an entertainment story, but they're certainly more aware of it and the sort of troubles that other people have.
I think it was good to make them aware that not everybody in those countries is like a subservient fundamentalist Islamist slave. You know that,
of course, in the same sense that it's not here.
I remember watching this documentary about people in Iran once, and perhaps somebody was maybe, in fact, it might have been somebody. I think it was somebody writing in a newspaper about how Arabic is translated into English.
Right.
And so we say things all the time like, "Oh my God, for God's sake, Jesus Christ." You know, we say things like that. Now, you know, I'm an atheist, and I say those things all the time. Sometimes people will, you know, deliberately steer away from that, and they make up things like "oh my science" and things, you know, to be comical. But in the same way that like people in you know, Muslim countries, Arabic has a lot of phrases the same as English, where they say things like, you know, "God willing," "thank God for that," kind of thing.
Yes, yeah.
But whenever people translate English into other languages, they don't necessarily carry across that so literally. But whenever people translate Arabic into English, they often do.
Yeah, because it can play on prejudices and play on expectations and things like that. Yeah, if you've got an agenda, then it's like they're giving you the material, and you're just having to pack it into a gun.
So maybe instead of maybe games can do the same thing that things like documentary films do. Imagine if you had a game, like let's take Gears of War, right? And you replace the characters in Gears of War with a gay man and a woman as the two main characters instead of Marcus and Dom. Now, you could probably make the obvious joke here about Gears of War actually being about two gay men, but what I'm saying is you could change those people into different sexual orientations and genders, and the game would be exactly the same. And the point of the game would be not that, you know, let's make a joke about gay people. The point is these people are no different from us.
Yeah.
That would be the point. The point would be to have like a transgender main character, and the point of the game is they're a transgender main character. They shouldn't be treated any differently from anybody else. They've got, you know, obviously people have their own issues and their own personalities, but that shouldn't affect the way we treat them and the way we look at them.
Yeah, I mean, that just in terms of representation of whatever ethnicities, sexualities, whatever, you can kind of, it's not forgivable, but you can see how it happens in film and TV, because you have actors and you have, you know, things to market. But when you're drawing them out of nothing. And yet, it's still old, strong white guy on the cover.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's a bit of a disappointment.
BioWare are starting to do a bit of creep where you can have gay romances in Mass Effect 3.
Yeah, but they're
and there's like a guy on. You go to the Citadel and this guy's like, "Oh yeah, I lost my husband in the conflict and everything." You're like, "Yay! People can have gay marriage in the future." Yeah, fantastic.
It's a good start. You know, it's a good start. Yeah. It's just. I think then for the people who are really into that, they say, "Oh, but it needs to go here, here, and here." But it's like, yeah, it's compared to what's happening.
I think it's
6 years ago. Is it? I think we're probably making some progress.
We're making some progress, but that doesn't mean we can't go faster and deeper. And I'm trying not to make this into a disgusting sexual metaphor about going deeper and harder and faster.
Well,
but you can always do more.
Well, I don't think you successfully avoided making it if that was your intent.
So yeah, I think we can always do more. And
I like that. I like the idea of actually using the fact that it's a load of people networked together and doing that kind of group consensus. Well, not consensus, but like group psychology stuff. That would be kind of interesting.
That's how you change attitudes. You change the consensus. You make it so it's unacceptable for people to protest at a gay pride march.
Yeah,
you know, you make it unacceptable for people to make sexist comments, or, you know, that horrible student lads blog thing. You make those things unacceptable by publicly speaking out against them and presenting it in media to people. And because games are so ubiquitous and so popular now, and I guess they're becoming more and more ingrained in culture, that's the perfect way to do it.
Well, I mean, if you look at how prevalent product placement is in games now, where you'll be driving an actual Jeep, or you'll have like an actual phone, like all that stuff, all the stuff you saw in Bond films 10 years ago, you now see it in games now.
In Max Payne 3, he picks up Nurofen and Sulfadine from cabinets.
And when you've got those big sponsorship deals going on, what that tells you is that people recognise that this is something that's going to be seen by an influential demographic. Typically the young male soon to come into some money of his own, or the young female coming into some money of her own, or just impressionable kids. What are we telling them now? We're telling them be a warlock, be a mage. It's not good enough, Alan.
So I guess the take-home message from this is that games haven't taught us a lot so far, but I think, and hopefully you'll agree with me, otherwise this has all been for nothing, that there's a lot of potential for them to teach us things.
Yeah.
Not just about ourselves, but also about the way we interact with others. There are more ways to interact with people in a game than by killing them.
Yeah, people can't see it, but we're actually holding hands and swaying right now.
Yeah, well, we always hold hands during podcasts. I thought that was common knowledge.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we've run the gamut, and I'm saying so yeah, and that generally means we've come to the end of a segment.
So yeah, if you enjoy this, please go to split-screen.net. You can find us on Twitter. I am at CP Wilson. If you want to actually follow someone who talks about games, you can follow Alan at AGBear.
Yeah, I'm totally got twice as many followers as Craig, so you're in for a bumpy ride. There's talk about games. There's pictures of what I'm having for lunch.
Oh God, yeah,
all kinds.
That's the warning though. Alan Instagrams his meals now. We haven't spoken about that. We'll need to speak about
I
that.
don't Instagram all of them. I wouldn't Instagram porridge. I had a really nice bowl of chicken ramen, and I wanted everybody to know that I was eating this and it was tasty. It's not just that. Pictures of games I've bought. There's that old car near your flat.
I hope you know that I'm going to fade that out now, and this is now going to be the end of the podcast. Thanks for listening.